the opening line of the book. I am the age of most of the ghosts that live here. They came here to make their fortunes in search of adventure, and most of them died before age 35. Some are buried in the cemetery here. Some are still trapped down in the mines. So it sounds like a fun place.
Yeah,
Well, everyone, thank you very much for coming. Brent, congratulations. You put out your first book.
Thank you.
It's awesome. Thank you all. What we're going to do is I'm going to interview Brent for, 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. So think of what you might want to ask him. I've known you a little while. As we were talking, we did an episode of the Daily Stoic podcast next door earlier, and we've known each other now 13 years.
13 years, yeah.
Which seems crazy. Not as crazy as buying an abandoned mining town, but here we are. I was thinking about when my first book came out, which you were there for. Brent was my intern on the marketing of my first book. And I remember absolutely losing my mind. There was stuff going wrong with the publisher. You know, you're nervous about what people are going to think about. You've worked on this thing for all this time. But I feel like I feel like you're a nice, even keel about. How do you feel?
All things considered, I feel good. I mean, it's really cool to be able to come out here and see people because, like, for me, the majority of the time I'm just online, so I don't actually get to see you guys. And so it's kind of cool to come and see faces, put faces to names. There's been no shortage of publisher problems, which you're aware of. My book's actually not for sale right now in the United Kingdom for some reason, even though it's launch day. Take that up with Harmony. But I can only...
There was a problem with the audiobook?
There's a big problem with the audiobook. I don't know if anybody ordered the audiobook and got emails about, it being delayed and stuff like that, but there's issues with the audiobook. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, we're at the painted porch and you can kind of only control what you can control. And so I try to just control what I can.
But that's what I do wonder if you've been stuck in a town at 8,000 feet of elevation with no running water and no electricity, and your food supplies are dwindling, or if you've woken up to a fire, if you've had floods, and every other biblical problem you can imagine, including a plague in your time there. Does it turn down the volume on other problems in your life? Or is it, how do you think about that?
I think when I first moved there, everything felt like a crisis.
Yeah.
You know, if the door blew off one of the buildings, it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? We got to fix the door. But then as the issues continue to escalate, the road gets washed out, there's a fire, there's an earthquake, there's all these things. They are like, your emotions are blunted a little bit almost, because you have, you can pull upon your own evidence to be like, hey, I solved a bigger issue in the past, this is going to be fine. And so,
But what about just the regular problems of life, or do those still exist there?
I mean, they still exist everywhere, I think, wherever you go, there you are kind of situation.
Uh-huh.
But I think that it's like definitely helped calm me down a little bit. I mean, you tell me, you've known me for 13 years.
Yeah. No, I'd be curious if, having to essentially fend for yourself and struggle to, get thousands of pounds of concrete up a mountain or to dig out from a snowstorm, if, you still feel the same when you're stuck in traffic or you're on hold with the credit card company. Like, does it give you perspective about, like, just the piddly things that everyone else gets bothered with?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even with the publisher thing today, like today I got an email when I woke up that the book wasn't available in the UK, which for an author going through their first book is about as annoying as it could possibly be.
Yeah, annoying is not the word I would use.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to keep it, there's children around, I feel like. And so, but yeah, compared to like rebuilding a hotel in the middle of nowhere, it's not that big a deal. And I try to like keep that perspective on most things. So I do think it helped somewhat. I mean, people that drive with me in the car a lot might disagree with the traffic situation, but I think generally it's helped.
Well, the nice thing about YouTube and social media is like you make something and then people get to see it, right? And ideally, lots of people can see it, or lots of people tend to see it because it's free, right? And then the struggle of other forms of creativity is like you've been working on this book for 2.5 years. Yeah. And it finally comes out, and then there's all these parts of it that you don't control, and also even if someone bought it today, like they're not going to have read it by tonight, right? Like it's just a different medium that you're in.
Yeah, well, what I like is like, with the book, I imagine you've experienced this too. Like, because you write it over the course of years, there's things I would love to change about this.
Yeah.
And I think with YouTube, at least, you get another swing a week later if you want to. You could get a swing a day later if you want to. But with a book, you're not getting another swing for a while, probably at least a year, 2 years, 5 years, however long it's going to be. And so for me, it's like, if I make a video that I don't love, I know that a week later I'm going to make one that maybe I like a little bit more.
Sure.
And so with the book, it is difficult to like understand that. I feel like, again, there's things I could change. Maybe you've progressed as a writer or whatever, or thinker, or whatever you want to do, but knowing that this is kind of a moment in your life and remembering that, I think, is like the important part.
Well, yeah, you work on a book and you think it's the best you are capable of doing when you write it, and then you turn it in and you feel like it's done, and then a couple months later they go, hey, can you record the audiobook? And now in my case, they don't go, can you go 900 feet underground and record it in a mine as you did? But then you read it and you're like, is this the worst book ever written? Do I know how to read myself? Like, do I know how to pronounce any of these words that I so flippantly put in this book? And so you have this sort of reevaluation of it all without the validation of the process of like humans saying, no, we really liked it. It's just you, in your case, alone in a cave, listening to the sound of your own voice, which the first time you hear in a recording is not a pleasant experience.
Yeah, I just think that like I went to speech class growing up, so I can't pronounce words to begin with. And so it's cool when you're writing a book to refer to all these, ancient Roman philosophers, Greek philosophers and stuff. And then you come time to read them and like, I don't know, Theseus. And so you're in Google, like how to pronounce, insert whoever it is. And like they have the thing that reads it. And so I did my best. I recorded the audiobook 900 feet underground in the mine. But I still got back 147 pickups when it was time to redo it. And
well, pro tip for next time, because I'm going to record my next store next week, and I asked my publisher to put together a pronunciation guide of any word. I go, just assume that a child is reading this and they don't know how to pronounce any of these words. And I said, don't give me that like fancy pronunciation guide from the dictionary. Right. Spell it out like I'm an idiot. Yes. And that's what I had them do, because I end up looking up every fifth word. Yeah,
and I realized that I can't string more than like 2 sentences together in a row. Yeah. Eventually you get to the point of diminishing returns when it's one sentence, take like a pause, one sentence, which must be miserable for the audio engineer. But
how did you find this telling the story of Cerro Gordo in pictures, in video, and then in the written word differ? I kind of remember you thinking, well, I do these voiceovers for the videos, doing a book should be easy. And then it wasn't easy.
No, I think that like the medium changed. With video, it's interesting because I get to show a bunch more stuff. I can show a beautiful drone shot. I can show my voiceover behind that. I can show things that I'm doing that. But trying to illustrate that in the written word was difficult, I guess would be the best way to describe it. And it's not like a one-for-one. How I talk isn't necessarily how you're going to write.
Yeah.
And so for me too, it was interesting because I was trying to figure out what's my favorite part of the videos. And I don't know how many people here have seen the videos, but I think for me, I try to blend in a little bit of history. I always try to like teach some of a history, some beauty, some adventure. And so the idea of this is Dawson.
Yeah.
You can't hear me?
Is that better?
All right. Check. Thank you, Dawson. This is Dawson. So when it came time to make the book, I was trying to think, how do I blend in the best parts of the videos into the book? So it would be like history, natural beauty, which is kind of the hardest thing, I think, to translate into words.
Sure. You have to be very good.
Yeah. I don't know if I got there, but the adventure part and then kind of the meditation on the other end of it. And so it was kind of listing out the adventures that I'd gone through that I enjoyed the most. And having the videos was a benefit because instead of like necessarily like a journal, I had a video journal seeing like my exact emotions in my face, how I was feeling in those different moments for the past 4 years. So I could refer back to them and kind of pull out what I wanted to and then try to recreate whatever I couldn't capture in the words, in a different way.
When you look at the early videos of yourself, do you see the toll that the last 4 years have taken on you?
I think anybody that
you're like those pictures of Obama, like before office and after.
No offense. No, or that guy that like went to war for 4 years, like before and after. I mean, Matt here is like one of my childhood friends, so I think that he could probably attest to the amount of years that I was aged. Well, it's kind of like dog years, you know. Every year up there is 7 years in real life.
Well, the opening line of the book, which I think is lovely. I am the age of most of the ghosts that live here. They came. You list the men and women came from all over the world, sailing ships from China, fleeing the famines in Ireland, farmhands and cowboys, the tenements of New York City, small towns across the Midwest. They came here to make their fortunes in search of adventure, and most of them died before age 35. They died of exposure. They died in famous mine collapses. They died of influenza and diseases they picked up in the brothel. They breathed in the lead dust in the Union Mine and got sucked into machinery. They died in gunfights over card games. They died of suicide and alcoholism and little cuts that got infected. Some are buried in the cemetery here. Some are still trapped down in the mines. So it sounds like a fun place.
Yeah, all of the miners that mine at Cerro Gordo are dead. So
Yes.
that's certain. And some days it feels like that. I don't want to compare my experience to the miners at all. I think it was obviously they had it significantly more difficult, but it's definitely a more difficult life than living here in Austin necessarily.
Yeah.
And so it's been a battle at times, but beautiful at others. And I think that like, if the trade-off wasn't there, then I wouldn't necessarily be there. And I think that like while it's difficult physically, mentally, emotionally, I think that the fulfillment on working something that you feel so passionate about, that you feel is part of something bigger, outweighs all of that. And I think it's brought like a satisfaction that I never necessarily found, here.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to someone who's a football player and you said, "But aren't you worried about the damage you're doing to your brain?" They'd be like, "I'll trade that in a second." They love it. So there's something kind of foolhardy. I don't want to say self-destructive, but when you find the thing that lights you up, you're sort of immediately not interested in the short-term cost or the short-term and long-term costs of that thing.
Well, it's easier to make that trade-off early on because at first it's like, oh, I'll be here for 6 months. I can not work out for 6 months and still be fine. You're like, oh, I can do that. And then it's like, oh, well, what's another 6 months of not working out if I'm getting into this project? You can get consumed by big projects. They become tunnel vision, literally and metaphorically, of just the only thing that you can see, and you won't talk to anybody else, won't think about anything else.
Do you think that's what happened to Burrow Schmidt? You tell the story of this guy who just starts digging a tunnel one day, and 20 years later, he's still digging it for no real purpose?
38 years later, he dug a tunnel.
How far?
A half a mile through granite. And so I think that, I think that what he found was like his purpose. I think he was searching for a lot of different things, and I think that I found that at Cerro Gordo too. People have been going to Cerro Gordo for 150 years looking for something. Yeah. I think originally they're looking for silver. They're all looking for maybe a life a little bit different, a little more exciting, a little bit better than maybe they had before they went there.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that didn't prove true, as you just read in the preface of the book. And I think it's still TBD how it's going to work out at Cerro Gordo necessarily. But I think generally, I don't know, I'm having a better time than I did before moving up there.
I would guess you're probably having the best time of anyone that's ever lived there, in the sense that, yeah.
I was comparing my own life to my own life. Sure. Definitely having probably the best time of anybody that lived there. It was not an easy existence up there.
Yeah, like if we were to go back and tell one of these miners that like, no, the real gold is on the videos you make or the friends you make along the way. They'd be like, what?
Yeah, they would throw me down one of the mine shafts.
Because I mean, I've seen it's this interesting transformation where, it's certainly taken a toll on you. And I remember we've had a number of conversations where you really, like, you were on the verge of basically a complete breakdown, having burned yourself out, and, the whole thing seemed bigger than a person could possibly endure. And then I've also seen you just get so lit up by this thing and consumed by it in a positive way that all that seems worth it to you.
Yeah, I think it's all worth it. There was moments, and I think going back to the social media and editing things, eventually you kind of portray a certain aspect of the life. Yeah. And I think I'm excited about the book because I was able to dive in a little bit more to some of the feelings that maybe I didn't show in the videos. The videos are generally pretty positive, but there's not 100% positive times at the town. There were some really dark moments. There were some times when you question whether it's worth it. My health is failing. I'm getting into arguments all the time. I feel very depressed and stuff. And you and some people here have seen some of those moments, but I try to leave those out of the videos generally.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I remember you did a video. It's like as winter is coming and there was like a storm and it blew the doors open. You were kind of like, you were showing like what it's actually like to live in a ghost town, more or less by yourself during winter, and you were like, I'm gonna actually be like honest and vulnerable in this video and show what it's truly like. And then I remember you going like, after I asked you how it did, and you said, well, I'm never gonna do that again. and no, in the sense that you were kind of stung by the reaction,
Sure.
because you thought you were showing people how it actually was, and they were going, well, why are you complaining? Like it,
Yeah.
I would have expected you. The art is supposed to reward authenticity and vulnerability and truth, but there is something about the algorithm, and I think also the expectations when people kind of live vicariously through something, that they want it always to be positive and wonderful, and it's probably not.
Yeah, well, I think that like all the videos are honest and vulnerable to begin with. I think that like it's one aspect of honest and vulnerable. I didn't think that, I don't think making a 40-minute video complaining about how cold it is in a town that you bought is like, gonna land really. It's just not necessarily something that I would want to watch as a viewer. And so I did make that video, but it's not always interesting. We talked about this a little bit before, but I think that eventually, whenever a camera's on, whenever there's another person in the room, it changes the dynamic a little bit. For a small amount or a large amount. And so over time, you're putting on a little bit of a show, whether that's 10%, 5%, 2%, no matter how much you try to not do that, anytime a tripod's introduced, it's going to change the atmosphere a little bit.
I actually didn't see those. Now everything's different.
Now everything's different. But I think that like over time you lose yourself a little bit in like what is the character and what is me kind of thing. And I think that maybe 2 years ago when I came down here, I was struggling with that a lot. And I think, I don't know, I've gotten back to a better point now.
Well, if the story of Cerro Gordo is people like, hey, this is how I could strike it rich, this is how I could succeed, this is the key to a better life, and then my understanding of the stories is like that kind of eats at the soul of a lot of those people. Like some of the guys became bad guys, and people I'm sure became addicted to it. It destroyed families, and looking at that briefcase that you talk about in the book, it's like there's divorce papers in there and lawsuit papers in there. Have you found that there's a similar sort of tug and pull of like the algorithm and internet, that you could see how someone could be consumed by that thing and changed by that thing, what do they call it? Gold fever or something? Can you have like an internet version of that?
Yeah. Well, I've actually like, the gold fever thing is funny. We had a gold prospector come up recently, and I never understood like the gold rush, gold fever until like he came and he started like, we actually started looking for gold in the bedrock, and I was like, oh, like it's like primal. Like I get it. I want to find gold like now. It's kind of what I'm gonna do. But with the other thing, I think that there's a certain allure to Cerro Gordo that you're only this far away from whatever you're looking for. So a miner could be 6 inches away from striking that ore vein that suddenly makes
generational wealth.
Generational wealth. Like, that this year we're going to finish the hotel and Cerro Gordo will be back on, back on track. That this one video will expose, what I'm saying? You're always this close. And I think that
this is the next level.
Yeah. And so Cerro Gordo is like interesting in that way. And it is just consuming. And once you get up there, as you've been up there, there's something about the beauty and the nature and kind of the history that has been told there before that just, I don't know, you feel a part of it, and you feel almost a responsibility to the past to make sure it sticks around and make sure you contribute to it in some meaningful way.
Yeah, I just think even with my own videos, like you make what you want to make, and then there's this sort of thumbs up, thumbs down, literally in on YouTube in some cases. But like and then also the rush and the exhilaration when something like hits and works, and like that's like a really exciting, motivating force. But then you also understand like it can ruin you. But I just think about the idea of prospecting, right, or surveying like what these guys are doing, and then there is some version of that online where you're like, will this post be the one? Will this photo do well? You have your own kind of treasure seeking world that you're in. Other people online being much more addicted to it, of course.
Yeah, I think you can go down the worst route. When I remember early on in Cerro Gordo, I had made like 4 videos, and I was just making videos that I thought were cool. Yeah. And so like they were not the right type of videos to be making. So we had this really big YouTuber come up, and he sat down with me in the kitchen. He was like, "Hey, I can tell you don't make YouTube videos." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like I make great YouTube videos." And he's like, "No, like your shots are too long. You're not cutting quickly. You need to tease that the video. You need to work for retention." He started giving me all these things that like proper YouTubers should be doing. And I
Yeah.
looked at him, he had like 10 million subscribers. Like, oh, like that's what you should be doing. And so you slowly start drifting down a path to, again,
Yeah.
like looking at the character. I remember eventually I watched a video and I was like, I don't want to make that type of video.
Yeah,
But it's
sure.
kind of hard to claw your way back and remember like why you got into it originally. And I think that like that feeling you're talking about, it's always a good feeling when something does good.
Yeah.
But there's nothing worse than a feeling when you didn't make something you really wanted to do and it didn't do good.
Right.
That's the absolute worst situation. So
Yeah.
at least some videos, like I've made videos that have done poorly, but like I really like them. There's like a rock climbing video that's probably my worst performing video I've ever made, but like I think it's cool.
Yeah.
It's like I can like negate that like anxiety about it not doing good by at least making something that I actually wanted to make. And so that's kind of how I think
Yeah, I
about it.
mean, I usually say that the book I'm most proud of is the one that's sold the fewest copies because it was the hardest for me to write, and it was the most.
Is that conspiracy?
Yeah.
That's your
Well, thank you.
That's your best book.
Well, I mean, that's the ideal scenario, right?
Yeah.
Is the thing you're proudest of, the people you respect say is the best,
Yeah.
or acknowledge, and then then you have this experience where something you didn't think was that great crushes, and then you're like, okay, I should just not care about this
Right.
at all. I should just make what I think is good because
Right.
that's the only sustainable way to keep doing the thing.
Yeah, you just have to, again, going back to like you control what you put in, and like you can control everything about the book. I can't necessarily control what happens after that. And I
Yeah.
think that's a better way just to sleep at night, is just to be like, hey, I'm going to make what I think is cool, what my friends think are cool.
Yeah.
And let the cards lie where they do.
So this version of Cerro Gordo, though, is like a big audible in the sense that I remember you when you pitched me on it and what you worked on and the people you brought on. It was supposed to be like a fancy resort. That was your plan. You thought it was going to be a hospitality thing. And then life intervened and you had to come up with a different version of it, or you sort of fell naturally into something else.
Yeah. I think hospitality was always it. The fancy resort might have been another person that was involved's idea
Yeah.
more than mine.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not the type of guy that hangs out at too many fancy places. And I
Yeah.
never wanted to like create somewhere where I wouldn't want to hang out. I think
Yeah.
that was like the worst situation. But it was the hospitality play going into it. And I think that for the first 2 years, we were almost like playing business is the way to describe it. We were creating spreadsheets, we were creating slide decks. I was creating all these things about what I would do to make the perfect situation. And yeah, everything changed moving up there. I think I understood the land a little bit better. Obviously, a bunch of things happened after being up there that changed the direction of the town. I feel fortunate kind of on the path that we're on now. It feels like we're on the right path finally after a long time, but it took a long time to kind of weave our way there.
Yeah, it's like you were a tourist in Cerro Gordo
Yeah.
for the first 2 years, and then I remember you calling me. I thought you were in your apartment, and you're like, "No, I'm making a run for it." In March of 2020, you got in your car and you drove across the country, and you ended up there. And it feels like you kind of saw it for the first time in a new way, actually being there and not having a backup plan or an alternative or the luxury of, I mean, nobody knew where the world was going or what was happening. And you had to sort of, it was just you there. Like you just actually had to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of one of the situations where a 400-acre property that hasn't had running water in 100 years is not like a back burner project. It's not one of these things that you can kind of put on the back burner and expect anything to happen with it.
Yeah.
You need to be kind of like boots on the ground doing things every single day. And I think that going out there, one, I realized that. I was like, oh, this is never going to happen ever if we try to like phone it in from afar. And then two, I found the kind of like satisfaction in doing that work and like the reward and working on the buildings, on like creating the videos, exploring the mines. And I think those two things combined was like, oh, this is where I should be. This is where I'm going.
Yeah, it feels like you went from like, we're going to need to put together a pitch deck and raise millions of dollars and do all this construction, which was probably never going to happen and no one
Right.
wanted to tell you.
Yeah.
And to like, hey, Brent, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm trying to build a porch on this building. Like you shrank it way down and decided to do it yourself.
Yeah, it just seemed manageable. Again, like you can only control what you can control. And I could have spent a couple of decades trying to raise money for a town, and I was just like, nothing's going on. And we had the evidence of that. 2 years happened, and nothing happened during that 2 years, essentially. Yeah. And then moving up there and kind of attacking it and kind of like doing progress, it felt rewarding. It felt like I was finally, again, like paying the town the respect it deserved. I think is the way I would describe it. And it felt almost like embarrassing to look at the 2 years before that when we were just trying to do these ideas for a fancy resort or something like that. It just felt very foreign and like that was never going to happen.
It would be wonderful to say like that was like immediately rewarded and you started making serious progress. But life's way crueler than that, which is you started to make progress and then life was like, let me take you way back, not even to the starting line, but like negative, 149 years is basically what happened to you.
Yes. Yeah. The center of all that plan forever was the meeting point inside of the American Hotel, which was the crown jewel of the property. It was the building that's been standing for 149 years. And we lost it. We lost it in an electrical fire in the summer of 2020. And it was one of those moments where I didn't really know what to do. I remember after the fire, I thought to the Edison quote. There's a quote that Edison, when his factory caught on fire and he walked out to see his son looking at it, and he said, "Hey, go get your mother and all of your siblings. They're never going to see a fire like this again." And they started to rebuild. And
but did you actually think that as your
I did. I did. I mean, putting that in 100 emails the 4 years before that, I was like, oh, this is what I'm trained to think of. And I remember the next morning I was sitting on the porch and I was kind of figuring out what I was going to do. And the former owner of the town came and he kind of put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Hey, listen, this is history. This is bound to happen eventually. There's nothing that you can do. There's nothing you can do about it, but what happens from here is up to you." And we talked about a little bit like that phrase, like what happens from here is up to you, is something that I clung to almost in the months afterwards to make the changes and to build back the town. And I think through that struggle, a huge community blossomed from that. A lot of people now support the town. I felt like it's stronger. I think at this point, the hotel isn't fully opened yet, but I feel like the community around it ensures that it's going to be around for a long time. And if my goal is to like ensure that Cerro Gordo and its legacy lasts for more generations, I feel like we're in a much better place now than we were beforehand, which is like very awkward in some ways to say, but I just think that
plus it'll have a much better bar in it now.
The bar in the hotel, if you don't know, came out of this building. Actually, I flew here, took the bar out of here and drove it in a 26-foot box truck all the way back to Cerro Gordo. It's an original Brunswick from bar. The area of the hotel. 1870s, 1890s was really cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. Whatever I can do. No, the line like,
I heard that those go for like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, that was a more generous. I looked it up after I gave it to you for the accountant wanted some more details for tax purposes, and I was like, oh, that was very generous of me.
Thank you.
But like the idea, this is part of history now. Like you study the history of Cerro Gordo, and you're like, okay, this is feuds and disasters and fires, and that's how it's been. But then when it happens to you, you're like, why is this happening to me? I think like we read about history, we know that history is disruptive and unpredictable and violent and devastating, and then and by the way, it's always been that way. Then a pandemic happens and we go, when will things go back to normal? As if those things are not normal and they haven't happened all the time. Like it wasn't fun for your grandma to go through the Depression or your grandfather to go through World War II. But what's history to you was their real life, day-to-day moments to them where they didn't know how it would end. That's the thing I think it's easy to forget about history is that it could have gone in any, like when he put that hand on your shoulder and he said, what happens next is up to you. Every single moment that we read about in history was someone making that choice.
Yeah. And he also brought up that there had been 3 or 4 massive fires at Cerro Gordo before that. And
that's where most of the buildings are.
Yeah, that's where most of them are gone. And but the town still survives. And he was basically saying, listen, this has happened here over and over again, to your point. This isn't just like some act of God against you. This is something that happens in these types of towns. What are you going to do next, basically? And it was kind of a call, a call out.
And if you're going to leave because of it, then you were never suited for this place to begin with.
And now again, like if you do think about these projects in the timeline of decades or centuries, it's the fire of 2020. It's like the fire of 1870. It's like the fire of 1920. There's been these milestones. So hopefully in 100 years, we look back and the town's prospering. People are still going up there, still enjoying it. And again, it's just part of the town's history.
Well, that Edison line, so he says to his mother, this is all in the obstacles way, which I appreciate you referencing. He says, go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again. But then he tells reporters the next day, he says, I've been through things like this before. It prevents a man from being afflicted with ennui. Basically, it's gonna keeps things interesting. But if you, yeah, he had incredible success and lost it. Had incredible success and lost it. He lost his hearing in an accident as a kid. Like he just had, life had tossed him around a bunch of times. And I've got to imagine that's part of, to go back to where we started, like maybe you didn't think that when it burned down for the first time, because that was the first big problem there. But every time the road is washed out since, every time you've been snowed in since, you probably go like, I've been through this before. I know
I
what
can
to
handle
do.
it. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we're still telling the Edison story today. What would we have said if he had just packed it up and moved on to something else,
Yeah, he took $1 million load from Henry Ford and he rebuilt. Yeah. And that was the final act of his life, was this like coming back from this devastating thing. Yeah, and is there kind of a mandala aspect of it? Those sand things they make, and then they get like every time you repair that road, and then another 100-year storm happens. There's been a 100-year storm, a 500-year storm, a 1,000-year storm.
I feel like they're trying to like make up these like things to like put attached to, like we had 2,000-year storms in 2 weeks, and at that point, and the term atmospheric rivers. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but like I've suffered now 20 atmospheric rivers in the last 2 years, and I don't know if it's like just not a East Coast thing.
It's called climate change. That's
there we go. And so I just feel that at this point I've repaired the road 3 times from scratch, and so when it happens again, it's not the crisis that it was the first time. It's just another thing that we have to do, and this is part of the process. And if you accept it, that part of the appeal of Cerro Gordo is the challenge of it. It's the difficulty, is the stretching of what you're comfortable with. Then you see it as just another opportunity to prove to yourself that you can figure it out instead of just this giant headache.
Well, one of the things I tell myself is like, look, if it was easy, if anyone could do it, then they would do it. And there'd be, in your case, 20 other ghost town YouTube channels, or, people would be doing the thing. Like if it was easy, it not only would more people would be doing it. As a result, it wouldn't be worth that much.
It wouldn't be notable either.
You can't write a book about it if everyone's doing it.
Right. That's true.
Yeah. And
it's all material.
Well, that is the wonderful part about being an artist, which is, I think I've said this to you before. You're calling me, this burned down, or I said, make sure you film it. Make sure you talk about it, right? Like, an artist has the ability to transform pain and struggle and heartbreak into their next thing. Like Robert Greene said that to me. It's all material. You can always turn it into something, and that is like pretty magical and special. And it's this sort of solace that, it doesn't matter how bad it is, because at least it's compelling.
It's comforting, but only so comforting.
Sure.
Just to be honest.
Yeah. No. Well, I think you go, hey, now I can. What's the lesson in this, right? Like it forces you as an artist thinking about yourself. Like, what's the lesson in this for me? What's the lesson in this for the audience? And you almost get to experience your own life a little. The performance element, it takes you out a little bit, so you're not like, why is this happening to me? You're like, oh, it's happening to me because I get to talk about the things that are happening to me.
Yeah, I think what helped for me as well is looking back into history and realizing that this had happened before. Yeah. And then when it came time to put together the book, I was able to pull all those threads together, not just my own experiences, but pull from the experiences of Mortimer Belshall 150 years ago, and kind of stack them all together and say, hey, listen, this keeps happening and this keeps being the result, and kind of extract out the meditations. And that's kind of how I set about putting together the book. I put together my experiences up there, my favorite stories from the past, and kind of played matchmaker and kind of what I took out of both of those. And that's how Ghost Town Living came to be.
Well, I think the book is awesome, and I think you're all going to love it. Why don't we do some questions?
Yeah.
Time? You can just shout them out. It's a pretty small space, or or not. I got more. Yeah.
Just so when you open up for people to stay there, and my wife is the one who has watched every single episode, and I've kind of come in and out. I'm kind of claustrophobic, so the whole thing about going hundreds of feet underground doesn't really appeal to me.
The insurance agent described bringing the general public underground as gross negligence, and you can't insure away gross negligence. Apparently, any insurance person here correct me. And so, no general public will be going underground just because these are 150-year-old mines that were made by dynamite. But we have we're in 400 acres that overlooks Death Valley and Mount Whitney. There's plenty of hiking room, and so the mines, unfortunately, are off limits. But I think that's kind of why I make the videos, so people can experience them without having to risk their life.
Yeah, I think it's not just that they're deep underground and they were made by hand hundreds of years ago, and so were the ladders inside of them, but it's also that it sits on one of the most prominent and well-known earthquake faults in the Western Hemisphere that really makes me never want to go inside one of them.
Yeah, you've been in a mine, though. I've seen you in a mine.
Yeah, like I went like 20 feet back and said, this is it for me.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to picture one of my friends calling me up and saying he has this idea. Ryan, what did you think and what did you say when he called you with this idea at the end?
I sent him back that meme of Randy Jackson that says, that's going to be a no from me, dog.
He also followed that up with a link of other ghost towns for sale to try to prove that it wasn't a special event.
Yeah.
And so...
I did ultimately, I subsequently came around for two reasons. One, he was really excited about it, and I've seen what he can do with stuff that he's excited about. And then I also realized, like, because we've worked together for so long, we have so many projects together, it was already going to cost me because it was going to preoccupy so much of his time. So I said I might as well participate in the upside also. But it's been really cool to watch. And then obviously I didn't see what it could become. I didn't predict, like my sons are huge fans of the channel. We visited, they want to see it. But Brent, we were joking about this earlier, Brent repaid me when I had this idea for a bookstore. He told me it was a terrible idea and tried very hard to convince me out of it. He said, you're going to be trapped in a prison of your own making. So we really
prison.
support each other, I guess is what I'm saying.
But if you read the articles, we're very supportive.
Yeah. Brent applied to be my intern in 2011. And
A long time ago.
Yeah, and remains my intern to this day.
Still interning. Still grabbing coffee.
It was very clear very early that he was meant for much bigger things than that, and we become business partners. He's helped me. Brent launched the Daily Stoic YouTube channel, the Daily Stoic email list. In fact, the first Cerro Gordo videos were shot with the camera that he had taken home after we'd filmed here or somewhere in March. And then because of quarantine, we hadn't seen each other since. And he just drove it 2,000 miles the other direction, and he's never given it back.
Borrowed it with the intention to return it. And that video or that camera is responsible for hundreds of millions of views. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that was a good investment, that camera. I feel like.
Well, it was free for me, so.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good investment for me. That was my ultimate contribution, is that I paid for that
appreciate
camera.
that. Yeah. So before this, I had a little bed and breakfast in East Austin on Cesar Chavez. It was in an old Victorian mansion. And so this idea of hospitality and history was always very interesting to me. But when the property came up, I had just turned 30. I was thinking, I'm doing a lot, but I still felt like there's something else that I could be doing or should be doing, or maybe there was some untapped potential there. And my buddy that was living in LA, he actually sent me the listing, and the listing was amazing. It was something like, buy your own ghost town or something to that effect. And he sent it as a joke. He's like, oh, this is your next project, haha, knowing that I loved history and hospitality. And I started reading about it, and I was like, oh, this is my next project. And I remember his tone changed a little bit as well when I called him back. And I was like, all right, I'm going to put in an offer today. And he's like, well. But that was kind of the impetus for it initially, to get into it, this idea that history and hospitality. And, I think that I went to school for real estate and finance. That was what my degree is in, so I've always had a passion in that. Ryan and I have worked together for over a decade in storytelling and that type of thing. And I felt like there's a lot of untold stories in this town to retell. And then growing up, like a lot of people, my grandfather used to watch Gunsmoke just on repeat over and over and over and over and over again. He had Alzheimer's, so he just watched the same episode over and over. And the love of the American West was there too.
Clarky, did you have a question? Yeah, what is it?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know exactly how old the mountain is. It's probably millions of years old. But the town as a mining town was established in 1865. And that's when they first started calling it Cerro Gordo. And it was founded by a guy named Pablo Flores is the one that originally found it. Good.
But I actually like that question because there's different eras and generations of Cerro Gordo down to some of the petroglyphs you talk about in the book.
I mean, there's petroglyphs just off the property that are 2,000 to 3,000 years old. There's bristlecone pines we talked about earlier that are there's a tree called the bristlecone pine. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but it's the oldest living organism in the world. Some of these trees are 6,000 to 8,000 years old, which is incredible to think about. And so, yeah, how old is Cerro Gordo? Significantly older than when they were calling it Cerro Gordo from, but they started calling it a mining town in about 1865. And so, yeah.
And isn't part of why it's had such a long, because usually these towns were like 3 years or 5 years, like they were designed to be disposable, to be abandoned. But like, I remember you were telling me like what the Spanish miners took out. They were so inefficient. You just did a video on this.
Yeah. So basically like the original prospectors there were Mexican miners that came up and were working in vasos, which are basically adobe fineries where they could take the ore, refine it, get out a decent amount of silver. And then some of that silver made its way down to Fort Independence, which is just by Cerro Gordo. And Victor Beaudry there, he was the merchant in Fort Independence. He's like, where did the silver come from? You know, he recognized the high quality nature of it. So he went up to Cerro Gordo, started a store. That store attracted the attention of a guy named Mortimer Belshaw, who was the kind of guy that brought the big financing up. And so Belshaw got there around 1865. That's when it became Cerro Gordo as we know it. And then he kind of made it into boomtown mining silver and lead for a long time. By the 1890s, it kind of had fallen into disrepair. And then 1910, a guy named L.D. Gordon came, and L.D. realized that while everybody was paying attention to the silver, nobody was paying attention to the zinc. And so for a mining life, it went from 1860 to 1940, which is 80 years, which again is incredible because most of these camps are set up for 5 to 8 years. And that's why a lot of them don't exist today, because when they were going into them, they weren't going into the mentality, we need to build the most structurally sound building that we can.
They weren't building buildings out of bricks.
No, they're like, hey, what can we stand up for 6 years to make our money and get out? And so that's why a lot of these mining towns in the American West don't exist anymore. And so that's why I think Cerro Gordo is so special, because we do have maybe 20 buildings that still are there, and we just do whatever we can to preserve them.
But didn't you just go through some of the slag from the Mexican miners, and you found there was still quite a lot of silver in it?
Yeah, so the main mineral they're mining, there's galena, which is silver, lead, and some other stuff. And they would reduce that down, and the discarded rock was called slag. And so the slag is basically stuff that you don't need anymore. They would ship it away in lead and silver to San Francisco, where they would finally take out the silver from the lead. And the reason they would do that is because, well, one, it's very difficult to get silver to get removed from lead. And then two, if they're shipping out 80-pound bars of pure silver, they would just get robbed over and over and over and over and over again. So they left the final part of the process for out there. But I've learned the refining process over the last few years. I can take the slag and refine it down. And they were leaving almost like 40% of the minerals behind in the slag because they were just mining so much they didn't care. There's like, get it done, get it out here, get it out here, get it out here.
They could afford to be inefficient because the deposits were so rich.
Exactly. They could afford to be inefficient. So if you adjust it for inflation, the newspapers report something like $500 million if the minerals were pulled out of the mountain. But if you were to include the slag, which is 40%, it could be closer to like many hundreds of millions of dollars more that is potentially being mined at Cerro Gordo.
When you start to do that math, do you get excited? Like, do you get like a gold fever? Like, there's still money in these mines.
I do until I take the process of refining it, and I spend like $90 in propane to make $10 of silver, and then it gets a little bit less interesting to me. Tofu the goat is very good. That's our resident goat at Cerro Gordo. Tofu's doing good. She has a teeter-totter. I don't know if you've seen her teeter-totter on Instagram, but she loves just every morning I kind of get woken up. She walks to one end and it goes boom, and then she walks to the other end, boom. And so starting before the sun rises, you just hear these clanks on either side, and so she's doing really good.
Little known fact, Brent started his goat habit in Austin.
Ryan
he had one living in your hostel in East Austin.
Yep, I sure did. I had a goat in East Austin. I had a golf cart in East Austin. That was named Turtle the goat. So close.
Until Turtle was kidnapped.
Turtle got kidnapped. Turtle got returned. Turtle got moved to Ryan Holiday's farm. And Samantha Holiday's farm, let's be honest. Yeah, that's probably my favorite part. There's been two main ones that I love. Like one, there's a family that was working there, and the husband was a diesel mechanic, so he was fixing all the machines, and then the wife was a cook for a lot of the miners. And their grandmother had saved her journal when she was living at Cerro Gordo, and they sent me a photocopied of the journal itself. And so what was interesting to me is because I think one of my favorite parts of being up there is just understanding the context of the town, understanding the history there. And so you can go down wormholes where I was reading her journal and I understood she would reference the owner of the mine who I would know, from my reading, but then I would find another name. I'm like, who is that? And then so you start researching that name, and that kind of just like puts the puzzle pieces in place more for the history of the town. And I think that's like what makes the experience of being up there so rich. Like something I like to think about is, let's say that you lived in Bastrop and you walked by a park every single day, all day long. If you stopped one day and looked up the history of the park, the next time you walk by that park, it's going to mean a lot more to you. And I feel like that's what has been happening up at Cerro Gordo for the past 4 years. That's why I've fallen in love with it more and more. Now, like every building, every mine shaft there, I understand the history of it. And like the journal that was sent just kind of filled in a lot of those pieces that I couldn't with newspapers. And Ryan and I were talking about this a little bit before, but the history of Cerro Gordo isn't as widely told as somewhere like Tombstone, Bisbee, these other Dodge City, Carson City, all these places. And we think there's a couple reasons for that, but a big one is all of the records for the town were kept in a courthouse in Independence, California, which is about an hour up the road. And over the span of 20 years, the courthouse burned down twice and was lost in an earthquake once. So 3 times all of the records got destroyed over and over and over again. And so when I do get this thing like a journal from a person that lived up there, it's almost like gold to me, and I can kind of start filling in the pieces.
What's the line in that journal that you talk about in the book and in one of the videos?
Yeah, the journal is very interesting. She lived there for about 3 years, and it kind of ruined her family. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. They were having really hard times. They were talking about like how hard the winters were, and only the last line she just basically says like, what I would give for one more Cerro Gordo sunset, after she had moved off the hill. And so it's kind of like she's lamenting for this time in her life that was very difficult, but probably gave her that feeling of really living that she had never experienced before. And so I kind of feel the same way. I know that it's difficult up there to experience it, but I know that in many ways it's the golden era. It is the time that I'm going to miss when I'm not there. And so to see her firsthand perspective was good. And then about a year later, a woman came up and she was 83, 85, maybe a little older than that. And her father had been the foreman of the mine, ran the mine in the 40s. And so she came up and it was amazing. She was just full of energy and she allowed us a video. I actually have a video of it. It's on my second channel, Ghost Town 2. And if you look it up, like I tour the property with her and we do a little tour and she gets to tell me about like her experiences. And she tells me about names that I didn't know before. And even like fun stories about how the first time she tried to cook for all the miners, she got very embarrassed because she couldn't even make mashed potatoes because she didn't realize that at elevation you have to use a kind of a different formula for the heat to kind of get your potatoes to be boiling. And so this just humanize the past in a way that makes it more relatable. It's not just names in the book, but she actually came up there.
Was she horrified that you still go down in the same hoist?
No, she had been down there and she told me that she used to go down and she told me things that I had never known. She was like, oh, and she was very clear-headed. She's like, at the 700 level, there's an exit at the 700, and I saw a deer in the exit of the 700 level. And I was like, what? And so I never read about an exit of the 700 level, but she said it so clearly.
Oh, it had gone, so an exit, you mean it goes up to the surface?
Like it had gone out into the mountainside because they burrowed out somewhere. And she said that one time she looked out and she saw a deer in the portrait of it. And one, I've never seen any animals up there because the water's gone at this point. But two, I had read every book. There's a USGS report from the 60s. I never read about a portal to the outside at the 700-foot level. And so to hear her say that was just, again...
You think you'll find it? Or you think it's
I have so many threads that are I'm trying to find.
Yeah.
There's like 15 of them. If you guys watch the channel, you probably know that I'm always looking for something, whether it's the Omega Tunnel, the 200 level. But yes, the exit at the 700 is on the list somewhere, and maybe
it'll keep you. Yeah, you got a lot to do.
Busy. Yeah.
We can do maybe a couple more.
Yeah.
You've got the ongoing scarcity of water,
Yes.
unless the snow from this winter pans out for you. But every time you go down to get the pump running again, and I see that pond of water in the tunnel, I wonder about heavy metals. Is that a concern for you?
So the old owner got it tested in Nevada, and I guess that wasn't a concern, but just to be safe, we're not using that for any type of drinking water. That's just being used to flush toilets, not even to take showers with. So that's never going to be the potable water. But it's interesting because like all of the levels of mine are so bone dry. There's no moisture. And then that level, it seeps into the mountain, and they've made that pool down there. And so it's really like magical when you go down there and you see this pool of water that's 700 feet underground after not seeing water anywhere. It's really cool.
And you have been tested for lead poisoning.
Yes. I did a lot of refining for a very long time. And so, yes.
So
Oh, next.
you moved 2020 March.
Yep.
Out there, pandemic, everything.
Yep.
Months of isolation. When you got to the point where things were, I guess really my question is like, when the local town folk, right, when people that lived down the base of the mountain, who is this guy? How did that? Were they starting to become involved? They think you were crazy, and then how much? Kind of an umbrella, sorry. How much of your time do you spend with other people? So obstacle to get there. Like, what do you do days? Are you mostly alone? Do you have other people living with you? Are you meeting town folk all the time?
Yeah, I think it's changed over time. Originally, when I went up there, the townspeople saw me more as a tourist, like we said before, because I was an outsider. They didn't know me. They didn't see me spending any significant amount of time there. So they thought maybe I was just trying to fly in and play Indiana Jones for a day and then leave, kind of. And then I think another turning point was being up there and working out. But then after the hotel too, I think there was a lot of eyes on what are they going to do now? Are they going to pack it up and leave? And a lot of locals would come up and they would see me in the backhoe at 12 o'clock at night, trying to clear the debris. So they kind of like, the word got out. And I remember that there was one particular local, he's actually since passed away. I talked about him quite a bit in the book. His name was Tip. And Tip kind of was the first one that treated me like I was a resident, not a tourist. And he was very well respected in the community. And he's the one that taught me how to use heavy machinery. He took me on a lot of hikes. He did all these things. And then after Tip and I had working, it kind of unlocked the rest of the town. And since then, the town is extremely supportive. I'd say the majority of the progress that we've done is thanks in part to locals in the community. And it feels really good. It feels like, again, when I'm walking into Lone Pine, I'm not a tourist walking through the town. I feel like I know most of the people that I see. They are excited to talk about the process. Everybody in that town is very excited about Cerro Gordo. Everybody has a connection to it in some way, whether their great-grandfather worked there or things like that. And so at this point, I feel a very close connection to the town. I feel like, that's where I live. That's my home. It's kind of the way I would describe it. As far as people coming up, early on, it was very sparse. It was just the pandemic. And so I think it was an okay time to be there because in my mind, nobody was really hanging out that much. So it was an okay time to feel that loneliness. These days, almost never alone. We have a full-time town manager that's also up there, so I can come these places like this. We get a decent amount of foot traffic during the better season. We might get 10 or 20 visitors some days coming to look around the museum because the town's open. Even before the hotel is open, the town is open to any visitors. It's free to check out. We have the museum of everything that I found around the property. And so we probably get 10 to 20 visitors on a good weekend that are always kind of coming through. And it's cool. And we also have volunteers that have been helping out at this point for years that have their own community as well.
Hey, Brent.
Hey.
So when you first started putting out videos, I was out in far west Texas near Terlingua.
Oh, yeah.
Building and managing a campground out there. So definitely related to the old mining town, ghost town thing. But I also really related to just the solo battle against Mother Nature, that especially in those early days. And I'm curious because I remember running into this all the time. It's like you have to make a decision. Okay, is just repairing and like the road and the fires, the snow, repairing kind of the same way? Is that the route? And I guess the question is, was there anything that you ran into with Mother Nature that you said, you know what, I can't do it like that. I've got to completely alter my strategy for this aspect of things.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to prioritizing the projects, that's a tough thing to do. And there's a town called Bodie in California. I don't know if anybody's here ever been to Bodie, but Bodie was a massive...
You have a video about Bodie,
Yeah,
right?
Bodie's an amazing town. Bodie was a huge gold mine in the 1870s. It's a state park these days. The town left to the state park. And I remember early on in my experience, I went to Bodie, and they have about 250 buildings at Bodie, and they have one head of maintenance. And so I went to him. I was like, how do you prioritize what you're going to do here? Because you have 200 buildings. I have 20 to, and he's like, it's all about roofs. That's what he told me. He's like, the only thing you need to worry about is roofs. He's like, if if water starts getting through your roof, the building's done. He's like, so the only thing I focus about all day, every day, forever is just roofs. He's like, I don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about windows. Yes, some moisture's going to get in, but if your roofs go, then everything else goes. And that like definitely made me think a little bit more about roofs than maybe I ever had before. And so I would say like prioritization, that was a big one. As far as like things Mother Nature has done and that I decided to not change, the road is probably the one I think about the most, but it's the most difficult because the access to the town is up an 8-mile dirt road, and it's technically a utility road because the Department of Water and Power, which is in Los Angeles, uses the road to get to one of the repeaters. So I can't do anything to the road without the county's permission, which is good and bad. It's good because liability is on the county. So let's say, hey, you come up, you drink a bunch of beers, you drive off the road. Like, it's not my road, it's the county's road. It's bad. it's bad. It is. No, it's not my road. It's bad because when I want to make improvements, they'll say no essentially. But to Ryan's point, this day it's part of the process. I hope it doesn't happen. I hope we don't get like a 5,000 year flood or whatever they're gonna make up this year. But like this, I don't know. Yeah, biblical is that the locusts are coming.
Like, so when they go, it's a 100-year storm. I don't understand math, but apparently it's like if every year you have a 1 in 100 chance of something happening, it's like every 20 years it should happen. So it messes with, we think these things are very statistically unlikely, but in fact they're not just statistically likely. They're like near certainties. Yeah. And so they should be happening, and so they do happen. And then we go, like with the pandemic, we didn't have one for 100 years, and then we're like, how is this happening? That's our desire to sort of keep things the same, even though what's actually the same is terrible stuff happening.
Yes.
Let's do one more. Who wants the last question?
What kind of sensory overload when you go from that ghost town back to like Austin? What's it like, or what are some struggles you have that you didn't have before when you were in Austin?
For the first like year and a half, I like never left the hill. I was just there. I didn't want to leave. There was the pandemic. I had a lot to do. I was just busy. I remember the first time I came back to Austin for the first time, and it happened to be the weekend of ACL, Austin City Limits. And one of my friends was performing, so I decided to go to Austin City Limits, and that was just like not the way to re-enter society after being on a mountain for a long time. Because also the interesting thing that happened is that for that first year, I was just making videos in a void. I was just making my thing, doing my thing. So the idea that anybody here even knows who I am was like a new thing. I wasn't used to that. So I went to ACL, and people started coming up to me, not even like just to be in the peripheral. They would come up to me. So like after being so far alone, that was a very tense moment to get back into the swing of things. But these days I try to be, there's a lot of people coming out to town, so I don't feel that social anxiety maybe that I did.
You're kind of like an animal in a zoo up there. Everyone's coming up to see you.
It can feel that way. Yeah, sometimes I peek out my door in the morning to see if anybody's there so I can go to use the outhouse or something.
That sounds like a great spot to wrap this up. Thanks everyone for coming. We've got books inside along with many other books. And Brent, will you stay? Are you
I'm hanging out on the
inside?
porch, so I'm happy to talk to anybody to answer questions.
Do we want to do that inside, or do you want to do it here? Or, you probably want to stand next to the book so people.
All right, I'm going to do it inside by the table.
Great. Well, thanks everyone very much.
Thank you guys very much.
Congratulations to Brent.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.